It looks like you got up to the mic, so you probably want to ask a follow-up.
Yeah. Well, I guess when you're talking about, I guess you brought up several other instances with like the divorced parent who gets remarried, cohabitation, but it seems that if two men or two women who are married and love each other faithfully, they have something that those other things lack, and that maybe that's the thing. And
yeah, so that's a possibility. So it could be the case that the reason that cohabitation and divorce and remarriage have these poor outcomes is because they're not stable, but that same-sex relationships, if they were stable, wouldn't have those problems. I'm open to that being a possibility. It still seems that wouldn't address the biological connection or the gender connection. But there are preliminary reasons to be skeptical about that. So what we know right now is that lesbian relationships are the most unstable of all. And it has nothing to do with homosexuality, it just has to do with gender distribution again. Women initiate 2/3 to 3/4 of all divorces in America. And so when you have a double female relationship, it tends to be the least long-lived, not because of homosexuality, but just because of two women. And one way to illustrate this is, when was the last time that you heard a guy say, "My emotional needs weren't being met, so I broke up with her"? That's not a typical male response. And so when you have the double female relationship, this can explain why when the social scientists look at gay male relationship, lesbian female relationships, and then male female relationships, why it is that the lesbian relationships tends to be the shortest, because both participants have a very high threshold for emotional satisfaction, and it's hard to meet that. So they tend to be the shortest lived. The gay male relationships tend to be the most open. And it has nothing to do, again, with homosexuality, it's just to do with men. Men tend to be the most promiscuous, and so when you have a double male relationship, you tend to get the most sexual openness, neither of which suggests that the relationships are inherently very stable. So that's why I think we even have reason to be skeptical about the stability, but I'm open to seeing what happens. But I do think we have good reason to be skeptical, and the preliminary science is supporting these conclusions.
It's supporting which conclusions?
So I think the Doug Allen study in Canada and the Mark Regnera study here in America are completely in keeping with the 40-year tradition. So once we had studies that were using large random representative sampling, those conclusions were perfectly in keeping with the previous 40 years, unlike the small, convenient snowball sampling that actually came to the conclusion that lesbians' relationships produce the best outcomes. And the other thing odd about that is that we know absolutely nothing about intentional motherless child rearing. We don't have a single study of same-sex gay parenting. Whenever we hear about single parenthood, it's always single mothers. Whenever we hear about same-sex parenting, it's always lesbian relationships. So we don't know that much scientifically about single father parenting or gay male parenting.